I'm joined today by James Hirsen. He's a New York Times best-selling author, commentator, media analyst, and law professor. James is also the co-founder and chief legal counsel for internationalesq.com, which is a legal think tank and educational institute for the study of law in the media. James, great to have you on. We haven't interviewed you before. You've done investigative stories on a number of different topics, and one is on microchipping and what you consider to be the possibility of mandatory microchipping in the future. So let's start at the very top. When you talk about microchipping broadly, what are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about a small computer chip getting smaller and smaller, known as a radio frequency identification chip. These chips send out signals that can be used to identify. They're in the form of either numbers or alphanumeric code or computer code. They also can be tied to databases, and they're small enough to be injected with a hypodermic needle. And they are placed routinely today across the world in animals for identification of animals. The thing that's happened, you mentioned that about this view of mandatory microchipping being my opinion. It's actually the opinion of many respected academics who have now sort of joined the mainstream. They call themselves transhumanists. These are people who believe that the future of mankind, or the next step for human beings, is to become one with technology, kind of a cyborg. As a matter of fact, one of them, Dr. Kevin Warwick, his nickname is Captain Cyborg. And these folks and their followers, including many young people who call themselves biohackers, have injected themselves with these chips, many times using the chip kits that are sold for animals, and done various things with them. Right now, what most of them are doing is opening doors, starting cars, interfacing with technology with their smartphones or computers and things like that. Although Dr. Warwick did an experiment where he was able to move a robot arm thousands of miles away by placing his chip into the internet, much like a sort of preview of Johnny Depp's film Transcendence, which viewed the future of somebody uploading their personality into a quantum computer and ultimately into the internet.
Right. Yeah. See, my concern is, and I'm very interested in this because we've interviewed transhumanists. We have scientists on the program all the time. We try to stay on top of new technologies. But the problem is we have a serious level of threat inflation in this country around so many things. And the RFID mandatory microchipping ideas, while you're right that there are some so-called transhumanist scientists who think at some point there might be mandatory microchipping, this idea about humans combining with technology is not really a new idea, right? Or combining with machines, pacemakers, contact lenses, prosthetic limbs. The idea that the RFID chip is a drastically different combination of humans and machines than all of the others seems to be at its face just incorrect. And it's the basis, as you said, for so many of these theories.
Well, I think it is different, and here's why.
Yeah.
We have two trend lines that are very disturbing. One of them on its own would not be. Moore's law says that technology increases geometrically every 18 months, and we've seen that. We now carry around a smartphone that has the computer power of a computer 30 years ago that would be on an entire floor of a college campus. So we see the technology increasing.
But we have to stop there, though, James. That's not even Moore's law, right? You're misstating Moore's law. I assume you know that that's not what it is, or maybe you don't. Moore's law is just that in the history of computing hardware, the number of transistors on integrated circuits doubles approximately every 2 years. What you're saying is not completely unrelated, but that wasn't Moore's law.
Okay, well, thank you for that correction. But the fact is that technology is increasing at an extremely rapid pace.
No question about it. If we look at the history of humans, if you look at the last 100 years, right, I mean, we've seen exponential technological growth, no question about it.
And we now have also an increase in the world in authoritative government throughout the world. Now, and if you look at history, you just talked about history, the norm for human beings was not the freedom that we enjoy in the West. The norm was people living under tyranny. And when you have an increase in tyranny and an increase in technology, there is cause for concern. We had Edward Snowden's revelations. We have had a mandate passed and blessed by the United States Supreme Court that says that the law requires every citizen of the United States to make a purchase. That same precedent can easily be applied to what both political parties are pushing for, a national ID card. And we've all seen this sort of evolution from ID cards to RFID technology already in my home state of Illinois, where I'm originally from. Two big retail chains no longer use credit cards. They use the swipe of fingerprints. And I can see it easily a time where a mandatory microchip would be required. Let me give you one example. The NBC News recently had a story, and they were extolling the positives of a microchip. And the way they did it, of course, is with a victim. And that was an individual who was taken to the emergency room and who died because they couldn't get access to the individual's medical records. And gee, if they only would have had a little implanted chip like their pet does, that could have had access to a database that would have, in fact, supplied the medical information.
Sure, but at the same time, there would be many other methods also, right? I mean, if we had a better system of nationalized electronic medical records, there are countless ways in which that particular situation could have been avoided.
Well, but not, for example, if you have an elderly patient who doesn't have ID and doesn't have something that would tie into their medical records, they're brought to the hospital unconscious. There's a whole bunch of reasons and ways that this is now slowly being sold.
Right.
And I think that's one of them. And the fact is, the RFID technology, as we talked about, is getting smaller and increasing. And it's something that, when we look at the healthcare law, easily, right now, based on the 2,700 pages and the huge delegation that Congress gave to the executive branch, the successor to Kathleen Sebelius could implement a mandatory chip as a prerequisite for the Affordable Care Act.
But see here, James, now you're really serving up the meat of this to me on a tee, because this is exactly where I think we're crossing over into the weeds, which is that the hypothetical you're suggesting, there were countless articles saying that there was mandatory microchipping, that there were such provisions in the Affordable Care Act. There were connections with the religious right claiming that RFID chips are the, quote, mark of the beast. And you're literally, hold on now, you're literally crossing over now into the extremist territory. And my view here, okay, no, I understand you didn't say that. And yeah, go ahead.
Wait.
Yeah.
Don't put words in my mouth.
I wasn't.
I did not say that it was in the act.
I didn't accuse you of saying that, though, James.
Those stories were false.
Right.
Those stories were false.
Correct.
It is true that the law is so ambiguous that if the executive branch, through HHS, decided today
to
require as a condition of their policies that they're issuing on the state exchanges that people were chipped, that law, that power exists based on the precedent of the United States Supreme Court.
I disagree with you. I completely disagree with you on that, but it would be up to the Supreme Court to decide. You or I are not going to ultimately decide that.
No. The case says that using the taxing power, that it is now okay to mandate that citizens purchase something or pay a penalty. If you can mandate that citizens purchase a service or a product, you can also mandate that they purchase an RFID chip. I'm sorry, that's what I happen. I'm a lawyer. I've appeared in front of the Supreme Court. That's what lawyers argue.
But James, if we're going to go down that road, you must admit that saying RFID chip is completely arbitrary. In other words, under that logic, we could be saying, hey, if they wanted to, they could mandate people purchase anything at all. And then it makes the conversation about the RFID chip completely irrelevant.
Now, you know the history, for example, of Verichip, and you understand that Verichip got in trouble with their public relations because they did, in fact, implant 200 of these RFID chips into the elderly that were in a nursing home without the proper approvals of government, many of whom could not consent. And now they've changed their name to Positive ID, a much more sunshiny name.
That's fine, but James, that's a private company. That's a private company. Here's the, let me step back for a second. The broad point I want to make, and we are running short on time, as fascinating as I find this, is that I don't think, unlike you, that there's anything unique about RFID technology compared to other technology, in the sense that, as for all of human history, every new technology has been both, number one, subject to interference and surveillance, and number two, subject to misuse. And I don't think, and I've not been convinced, that there's anything different about RFID technology.
Oh, there's something very different. RFID technology is so small, it goes into the body, and as long as, of course, the lifespan of the chip exists, it's stuck in the body. And if it's injected in the body, theoretically, and forgive me, you're going to accuse me of wearing a tinfoil hat, but it can be injected without people knowing. And we have a history of governments doing this sort of thing. I mean, did we know until Edward Snowden told us about the surveillance?
Absolutely. Anybody who was paying even the most remote attention after 9/11 and saw what was passed was absolutely not even remotely surprised by the revelations of Edward Snowden.
Please, the Patriot Act is a tiny microcosm compared to what Snowden revealed. And no one was surprised. Then why is Snowden hiding in Russia? I mean, the fact is...
Well, because he broke laws and he doesn't want to get arrested.
Huge amounts of metadata. The public was totally unaware. Greg Greenwald is being heralded for his reporting on this. He has a book out on it. It was a surprise.
All right. Fair enough. James Hirsen, it is a fascinating discussion. New York Times bestselling author, commentator, media analyst, law professor. We didn't agree, but that's okay. Very interesting conversation. Thanks for being with us.
Okay. Thanks for having me.